Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Franceschini. Today I'm going to explain to you how to use quotations because from now on you will be using quotations in your discussion board posts and you will also use your quotations in your essays. So I want to make sure you know how to do that correctly. There's a special way that you have to punctuate quotations. If you introduce a quote with a signal phrase, use a comma to set it off. Example, in his book, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, comma, an American Slave, comma, written by himself, comma, Douglass states, comma. Notice that you have to have a comma there before the quotation starts. Quotation, I have often been utterly astonished, to find persons who could speak of the singing, comma, among slaves, comma, as evidence of their contentment and happiness, end quote. And then in parentheses, 1014, and parentheses, period. That parentheses is the page number on which that quote was found. You can use brackets to insert an explanation into a quotation. In this way, you can add a quick explanation from your reader. For example, quote from these meetings, and then in brackets, Jefferson gained a heightened appreciation of the arts, fine wines, music, politics, philosophy, and science, end quote. And there's the page number in parentheses again. Use SIC, S-I-C, to signal an obvious error in the quoted material. In this way, you will not get the blame for a spelling, grammar, or factual mistake. Place SIC, S-I-C, in brackets right after the error. For example, she wrote, comma, quote, they made their, T-H-E-R-E, sick beds, period, end quote. The correct sentence should have been, they made their, T-H-E-I-R, beds. So you're letting your audience know that you know there is a misspelling there and it is not your fault. Mechanics for literary quotations. Referencing sources. The first time you reference an article or other text, you need to give the full name or names of the authors, the title of the article, and the name of the magazine or book or website. Put the name of articles, essays, poems, stories, chapters, and songs in quotation marks, such as The Raven or Rip Van Winkle. Italicize titles of books, movies, magazines, newspapers, periodicals, databases, and musical albums. Like Of Plymouth Plantation is the name of a book, and Literary Resource Center is the name of a database. Introduce the author. The first time you use a quote from an article, you need to use the author's first and last name, Washington Irving or Harriet Jacobs. The next time you use a quote from that author, only use the last name, such as Irving or Jacobs. Never refer to an author by their first name only. Deleting from a quote. Use ellipsis marks like the ... to shorten a lengthy quotation. When you quote a source, you do not need to use every word or sentence as long as the information you cut out does not change the author's intended meaning. If you want to cut out a word, phrase, sentence, or more from the quotation, add in 3 spaced periods to indicate that you took information out. These marks do not take the place of punctuation marks in the quoted material, so you might use a period or comma and immediately follow it with ellipsis marks. For example, in his book, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, comma, an American Slave, comma, written by himself, comma, Douglass states, and this is the same quote that I used before, and notice that it's got the ellipsis marks in here to show that I took some of the information out because I wanted to keep the beginning and keep the ending, but the middle wasn't pertinent to what I was trying to explain, so I took that part out and replaced it with that ... Next, quoting a poem. Many of you will be writing essays or writing about poetry in your discussion posts. When you quote 1 to 3 lines of poetry, you follow these guidelines. When you quote a single line of a poem or part of a line, just put it in quotation marks as you would for any other quote. So the quote here is success is counted sweetest, end quote. Then for citations, I've got in parentheses the author's last name, Dickinson, and the page number 1250, end parentheses. If you quote 2 or 3 lines, use a forward slash to mark the line breaks. Put a space before and after the slash. Make sure to use the same punctuation, capitalization, and styling as in the original text. So here's a 2-line quote from Emily Dickinson. Quote, "Success is counted sweetest / by those who ne'er succeed." End quote. So that slash mark indicates the break in the line of poetry. And that's Dickinson, page 1250. Quoting more than 3 lines of poetry. If you quote more than 3 lines of poetry, set them off as a block quote. Start the quotation on a new line, indented 1/2 inch from the left margin with no quotation marks, and include the line breaks in the quotation. When block quoting poetry, keep the formatting as close to the original as possible. If there is any unusual spacing, reproduce this in the block quote. So here is the 4-line quote from that Emily Dickinson poem. "Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires sorest need." Notice that I did not need to put it in quotation marks, but I kept all of the punctuation from Dickinson's original poem. Then at the end, I put the period and then the name of the author and the page number in parentheses following that long quote. A long quotation in general. For quotations that are more than 4 lines of prose or 3 lines of verse, place quotations in a freestanding block of text and omit quotation marks. Start the quotation on a new line with the entire quote indented 1/2 inch from the left margin. Maintain double spacing. Your parenthetical citation should come after the closing punctuation mark. For example, when citing more than 4 lines of prose, use the following example. According to the Models for Writers textbook, the way sources are added into an essay is almost as important as the choice of words to use. So this is a block quote. I've set it aside. I'm still double spacing it. I do not need to include my quotation marks because it's set aside as a block quote, which indicates it is a quotation. Whenever you want to use borrowed material, such as a summary, a paraphrase, or a direct quotation, your goal is to integrate these sources smoothly and logically and not disrupt the flow of your essay or confuse your readers. It is best to introduce borrowed material with a signal phrase, which alerts readers that borrowed information is about to be presented. There's a period here, and then I've got in parentheses the names of the authors and the page number. Integrating sources. Using signal phrases. So just as I was reading about, to write an effective research paper or even a discussion post, you will smoothly integrate and smoothly incorporate supporting materials from outside sources into your original essay. Integrate cited information smoothly into your text so it is logical and does not disrupt the flow of the essay and confuse readers. To do this, introduce it with a signal phrase. So here are some examples. According to Smith, Smith emphasizes that, Smith points out that, as Smith notes, Smith reports that, Smith contends that, Smith suggests that, Smith claims that. So you will use the name of whatever your author's name is instead of Smith here. That's just as an example. Introducing quotations continued. To guarantee that your reader clearly follows what you are saying, you should introduce your quotes, paraphrases, and summaries with a signal phrase or marker verb rather than simply sticking it in there. If you add a quote without any sort of introduction, your reader may not understand how the quote connects to your paragraph or even if it makes sense. Think of it as similar to a random thought in a conversation. So here are more signal phrases and then examples of marker verbs you can use. According to, in her article, in the opinion of, author's name shows that, author's name argues that, author's name plus any of these marker verbs. Author's name acknowledges, agrees, believes, compares, denies, endorses, implies, observes. So there are all of these that you could use to potentially introduce your quoted material. You also want to make sure that you use a quote sandwich. Do not just stick in your quotes. A much better route is to make a sandwich of the quotation. You will have the introduction, perhaps including a comment about why your source is worth listening to, the quoted material itself, whether it's a direct quote or an indirect quote, such as a summary or a paraphrase, the citation, and a discussion of the text or explanation of the quoted material to back up your argument and help the reader understand it. So here is what it should look like. Your quote sandwich: introduce your source, give your quote or fact and cite it, and then tell how the quote or fact supports or adds to your paper. Here's an example, and you can notice that I've color-coded each part to match what it is. In poem 112, Dickinson writes, quote, "Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed." Page number 1250. Because I've already written Dickinson's name up here in that introduction, I do not need to include it here. But I am going to explain this. With these words, she explains that success is only desired by people who have never been successful. Once a person achieves success, he or she will no longer long for it. It is possible that Ms. Dickinson felt this way because she did not, in fact, want her poetry to be published or any recognition from it. Thus, she did not actually want the success that so many people long for. Here are more helpful ways that you can use your quote sandwich. Write our specific quote sandwich examples for how to introduce quoted material in steps 1 and 2, and how to explain or analyze the quotation in step 3. Note, do not refer to quoted material as a quote. Do not say "this quote says." Instead, use language like the examples at right. So you'll introduce your quoted material by saying X states, according to X, in X's view, in the New York Times, X urges that, etc. And then when you introduce your analysis of it, you say something like, basically, X is saying, or in other words, X believes, in making this comment, X argues that, X is insisting that, X's point is that, the essence of X's argument is. Notice that the word quote is never used. In-text citations in MLA style. Use in-text citations within the essay text each time you include an outside source in your essay, and you will practice this in your discussion posts. You need to use in-text citations for primary, so that is the works themselves that the authors are writing, and secondary sources, so that would be any work that you get from the database. This includes summaries, paraphrases, direct quotations, or a combination of direct quote and a paraphrase. Example of the most common in-text citation types follow on the next few slides. In-text citations, so there's the basic citation, and basically in-text citations contain just enough information within the essay itself to help readers locate the source in the works cited list at the end of your paper. There are two basic types. The basic citation, place the citation at the end of the sentence containing the material you are documenting. The citation should appear after the last word in the sentence, but before the end of the mark. So here is my example. The Native Americans who lived in the West and South were allies of Britain and a threat to the settlers. Marin 15. So notice I've got the author's last name and the page number inside the parentheses, and the period always goes after that. Basic citation with a signal phrase. If the name of the author is stated in the sentence, then give only the page number in parentheses after the cited information. If no page number is listed, no parenthetical citation is needed. So here it says, according to Marin, Americans were also outraged when Britain ruled that no neutral nation could trade with any European nation except by using British ports. So notice that the period at the end of the sentence goes after the page number here. And because Marin is here, then we do not need the author's name here. You don't need to put it twice. You just need the author's name once. So if you use it in the signal phrase, you do not need to put it again in parentheses. Citing quotations and paraphrases. So here's an example of a direct quotation with the author's name in a signal phrase, according to Lee and Gare. And then there's the quoted material. At the end is the page number in parentheses. The period goes after the parentheses. A paraphrase, a clearly marked ID tag, etc. So here's the paraphrase. I did not use a signal phrase, so now at the end of the sentence, I'm going to put the author's last names, the page number in parentheses, period goes after it. A paraphrase from a source with 3 or more authors. In MLA style, if you have 3 or more authors, you only need to list the name of the first author, followed by et al., period. So as Belenky et al. Assert, comma, there's my signal phrase, I've got the page number at the end in parentheses, period goes afterward. A combination of a direct quote and a paraphrase. Lee and Gare emphasize that the best means of identification for an animal is, so I'm paraphrasing what they said here and then adding at the end part of a quote. Notice that I've given the author's names here, so I just need the page number in parentheses at the end along with that period. Here are in-text citations for digital or non-print sources. You want to give enough information in a signal phrase or in parentheses for the reader to locate the source in your list of works cited. You don't need to use the page number if it's a digital or online source. If you are citing a work with stable pages such as a PDF, then you would use the page number. So notice here the author's last name is given in parentheses. That's all that's needed. Here, because the author's last name is used in a signal phrase, you do not need to put anything in parentheses over here because there's no page number. Here is an example with the author's name in the signal phrase, but it was a digital source, a PDF with stable page numbers, so those page numbers are in parentheses at the end with a period at the end. So those are the basic works cited, in-text citations that you will use for your papers and also when you are writing your discussion board posts. The works cited entry, you will need to include that in any essay that you write that has research, and you will need to include just a very brief entry in your database, in your discussion. Each time you cite a source in your essay, you need to include an entry for the source in your works cited page. For each source, you will need to determine the kind of source used, if it's print or online. Here are some examples. And I've provided in the week 4A folder and the week 8A folder, I have provided examples of the most common citation formats and a full lecture on how to use them. This is what a short work from a website would look like. You probably will not use this at all in your discussion. This is a journal article from a database. So notice you've got the article author, the title in parentheses, in quotation marks, the title of the periodical in italics, the volume number, comma, issue number, comma, date of publication, comma, page numbers, database name, the digital object identifier, or the URL, and there's an example of each. One work from an anthology or collection, and this is what most of your discussion board entries will look like for your works cited entry. You need to have the author's last name, not the editor's name, the author's last name of the short story that you will be working with or the essay, etc. So the author's last name, comma, first name, the title of the work, so this is Smith, comma, John from week 1A, the general history of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles in quotation marks, then the name of the textbook, the Norton Anthology of American Literature, shorter 9th edition, volume 1, beginnings to 1865, which is italicized, comma, edited by Robert Levine, so that's the name of the editor, comma, this is the publisher, W.W. Norton and Company, comma, the year of publication, 2017, comma, and the pages that this work were on. So that's pages PP period 56 to 69 period. You use PP here if it is more than one page. If it were only on one page, you would only use P. And here's another example of one entry from an anthology. If you have two or more works from the same anthology, then you will give separate entries for each of those two works and a separate entry for the anthology itself. So this will probably happen in your essay, your midterm and your final essay. You will be quoting more than one work from your anthology. So you will need to include a citation entry for the anthology itself and for the works that you quoted from within the anthology. So notice that for these works, Because you are including the entire entry for the anthology, then for the works themselves, you only need author's last name, comma, first name, period, the title of the work, the editor's last name, in this case Levine, comma, and the page numbers of the work. You do not need to write out the entire citation if you have 2 or more works from the same anthology. And that's the end. I hope that you have found this to be helpful and that you will use this information. Please let me know if you have any questions and have a great day.